A short history of financial bubbles. 1. Like recessions, financial shocks are as old as capitalism itself. Tulip mania started in Holland in 1624. The 18th century witnessed the South Sea bubble in Britain. Speculation focused on the shares of the South Sea Company that had been chartered to slave and fish in the South Seas, and the Mississippi land bubble in France. The focus of the attention was land values in France's territory of Louisiana. The 19th century was full of financial panics that only looked small in comparison with the big one of the 20th century, the stock market crash of 1929 and the banking collapse of 1930 that led to the Great Depression. That quake almost destroyed capitalism. Unemployment hit 27%. The last half of the 20th century has also seen its share of small and large financial panics. The collapse of the American savings and loan industry, a worldwide collapse in property values, the stock market crash of October 1987, one major stock market crash in a small country, Taiwan, and a very big stock market crash in the world's second biggest economy, Japan. Financial instability is to capitalism what succession problems are to medieval kingdoms or dictatorships. Both put their respective systems at risk. Like unemployment, theoretically, financial crises should not occur in capitalism. Patient, long-run investors who know the true underlying values beneath those financial assets should be buying and selling in the financial markets to offset the instabilities created by the herd mentality of the short-run speculators who jump on upward and downward trends. Unfortunately, patient financial investors with their eyes on the distant future interested in long-run equilibrium values just don't seem to exist in any number. A short history of financial bubbles. 2. If one examines financial crises, the question is not, why did the markets crash, but how could market prices have reached such unsustainable levels in the first place? Examine the value of tulips in the 1620s in Holland. One tulip bulb bought 3 homes in Amsterdam. The value of the shares of the South Sea Company in the early 18th century. The value of land along the Mississippi in France's Louisiana Territory in the late 18th century during the Mississippi land bubble, or the values of the American stock market in 1929, doubling in 1928 and 1929, although the GNP was already falling in those years, the Taiwan stock market in 1988, property values in the mid to late 1980s, and the Japanese stock market in 1990, 100-to-1 price-earnings ratios. And in each case you see assets clearly grossly overvalued by the financial markets. Given absurd overvaluations, it is only a question of when the market falls and whether the fall is slow or rapid. How could otherwise smart human beings not see that assets were overvalued? The answer is found in greed. Humans know exactly what is going to happen, but they cannot resist. As prices rise in a financial bubble, there is a lot of money to be made in the short run on the way up, even if everyone knows that prices are too high and must eventually fall. Everyone jumps into the markets thinking that they will be smart enough to get out before the end comes. If one gets out too soon, one loses a lot of potential income. A short history of financial bubbles. 3. But it is impossible to predict the timing of the peak, since some trivial factor that never will be discovered determines the exact timing of the end of the bubble. To this day, for example, no one can tell exactly why the American stock market started to fall on October 29, 1929, as opposed to a few months earlier or a few months later. Some do get out in time before prices start to fall, but most don't. When the end is clear, everyone rushes to sell, and prices fall before anyone can exit. At the end of every such bubble, everyone declares that it won't happen again, but it always does. Memories fade, and those huge profits on the way up to the peak of the bubble are irresistible. For the first 3 decades after World War II, the institutions that had been put in place in reaction to the debacle of the 1930s prevented any repetition of these events. It became possible to believe that financial instability was not an inherent part of capitalism. Believing so, the movement toward less regulation of financial markets began in 1971, when the world moved from fixed to flexible exchange rates. By the late 1970s, all of the world's principal countries, with the exception of Japan, had abolished the capital controls adopted at the end of World War II. Over the decades of the 1970s and 1980s, the regulations adopted to prevent a recurrence of the Great Depression were rescinded. If legal deregulations had not occurred, technological deregulations would have occurred. New technologies make obsolete many of the regulations, such as capital controls, that had previously existed. If the old regulations had not been rescinded, they would simply have ceased to be obeyed. When money had to be loaded into a backpack and walked across the Alps from Italy to Switzerland, it was possible for the Italian government to enforce capital controls. A short history of financial bubbles. 4. When money can be moved instantly on a personal computer, the whole idea of capital controls melts away. The necessary laws can be passed, but they cannot be enforced. What is true for capital controls is true for most financial regulations. In the aftermath of today's crashes, someone always suggests more regulations to stop future crashes. Stop program trading was the cry after the 1987 crash, but in today's world, regulations cannot be enforced. If regulations are imposed by some government, those financial activities simply move electronically to some spot on the globe where they are not regulated. When the Japanese government made it illegal to trade some of the complicated derivatives that depended on the value of the Japanese stock market, their trading simply moved to the Singapore Stock Exchange. Global capital markets and the existence of electronic trading systems have made it possible to move enormous amounts of money around the world very fast. On a normal day, the world capital markets move $1.3 trillion, but all of the world's exports amount to only $3 trillion per year. In a little over 2 days, the world's capital markets move as much money as all of the world's economies move in a year. And on an abnormal day, the world's capital markets can move much more than $1.3 trillion. A high school-educated trader for a British investment bank, Barings, located in Singapore, places a $29 billion, $7 billion that it would go up, and $22 billion that it would go down, bet on the Japanese stock market. What he did was not unusual. We only know his name, Nicholas Leeson, since he lost $1.4 billion and forced his firm into bankruptcy. Very large, electronically connected global markets don't change the probabilities of having financial bubbles, but they do make them potentially bigger, and they do link national markets together so that markets are more apt to crash together.